All right, so today let's talk about a world where the ground you walk on can't be trusted, where your tools lie to you, and where reality itself, well, it's kind of up for negotiation. We're diving into the story of the settlement of Vanth, a place that was built right on the very edge of existence. Our guide through all this is a man named Kael Muren. He's a surveyor, a man of numbers and facts, and right from his very first words, you just feel the incredible weight of what happened there. This isn't just some dry report. It's a testimony. He's trying to measure something that broke the very idea of measurement. So, let's start right where Kael did, with his arrival at Vanth. From the absolute moment he sets foot in this place, it is crystal clear that something is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, get this. The official contract, the legal document everyone signed to settle the land, had this completely bizarre clause buried in the fine print. It wasn't a warning about bad soil or harsh winters. It was a warning about a lack of ontological stability, a legal disclaimer for reality itself. And of course, everyone just blew it off as weird bureaucratic language. Spoiler, they were very, very wrong.
So, the first clue that things are off is the land itself. After it rained, it didn't just get muddy, it became responsive. It would yield under his boot with this weird organic quality. It felt less like soil and more like living tissue. Just unsettling. And then you had the well. Now, you could drop a stone down and hear the splash, so physics still worked. Kind of. But if you shouted into it, nothing. Not a single echo came back. Your voice was just gone, as if something at the bottom had received it. It was this chilling sign that the laws of physics here were playing by a whole different set of rules.
And the people, the ones who got there before Kael, they were strange, quiet, disconnected. They'd just stop what they were doing and stare off into the middle distance. The official explanation was something they called perceptual fatigue. But the truth was so much weirder. They weren't staring at nothing. They were seeing the very edge of everything they understood.
Now remember, Kael's a surveyor. His whole job, his whole world, is about imposing order on the land with precise measurements. But what happens when the land just refuses to be measured? Kael finds himself in a surveyor's absolute worst nightmare. He'll measure the angles between three landmarks one day, and yep, they add up perfectly. Makes a perfect triangle. But then he does it again the next day, from the exact same spots, and his instruments give him a completely different set of angles. And here's the kicker. They also add up perfectly. The points haven't moved, but the space between them has completely changed. The geometry of the world is literally shifting day by day. And Kael wasn't the first one to figure this out. The surveyor before him, a guy named Aldrich Fenn, he ran into the same exact paradox. He checked his tools, he doubted his own sanity, and he was left with just one terrifying conclusion. The land itself was broken. And right after he realized that, Fenn just walked off into the forest and was never seen again. And this is what Fenn left behind in his notebook. His very last measurement wasn't a number at all. It was a drawing, a spiral, winding tighter and tighter, literally digging into the paper as if he was trying to map a path into an abyss. He wasn't just measuring the land anymore. He was measuring it coming undone. Okay, so how can space itself be wrong? How is that even possible? The answer, weirdly enough, comes from a banned book that Kael's sister had given him, a text that lays out a completely radical new kind of physics. And the central idea here is it's a total mind-bender. Dr. Keene basically argues that the stable, predictable world we live in, with right angles and fixed distances, that's not the default state of the universe. It's something that has to be created. It has to be maintained by the constant cumulative weight of conscious observation over thousands and thousands of years. So what is the default state? Keene calls it the substrate. The best way to think about it is like pure potential, a chaotic, unwritten reality. It's the static before you tune in the channel. No fixed rules, no geometry, just possibility. So then what we do, just by living, is something called formatting. By measuring things, building in straight lines, and just collectively agreeing that reality is stable, generation after generation of us literally writes that stability into the fabric of space. We are, in a very real sense, the authors of the world's consistency. And that explains everything about Vanth. Vanth is a threshold zone. It's a place where human presence is too new, too thin to have really formatted the substrate yet.
So the settlers aren't just building on empty land, they are in a constant, unconscious fight to write their reality onto a page that is still mostly wild and blank.
And for a few weeks every single year, during a period of absolute, total darkness they called a trough, that battle to write reality is very, very nearly lost. These aren't just suggestions. These are laws. And you can bet every single one of them was learned through some terrifying, horrific experience. During the trough, see, the formatting effect of daylight is gone and the substrate just boils up to the surface. These rules are a desperate attempt to cling to a shared reality when the darkness is trying to dissolve everything. And the effects were absolutely real. You could measure them. Kyle's neighbor lived in a shelter 40 meters away before the trough began. After 18 days of darkness, her shelter was now 53 meters away. The buildings didn't move. The space between them literally grew. The substrate was seeping in and expanding reality. Saragas, one of the settlers, just nails it with this quote. Darkness in Vanth isn't just the absence of light. It's the presence of the substrate. It's raw, unwritten reality. And in that darkness, when space becomes unreadable, new rules can be written on the world and on the people who live in it. So after barely surviving the trough, the settlers face this huge choice. What do? Do you fight tooth and nail to impose your old, familiar reality, or do you try to learn the language of the new one? And the camp basically splits in two. You've got one faction, the Euclidean resistance, who think they can win by just doubling down, measuring harder, building straighter, forcing human order onto the land. But then you have the hyperbolic adapters, and they believe the only way to survive is to learn the substrate's own grammar, its own geometry, and build with it, not against it. And this leads to just an absolutely brilliant solution from the camp's carpenter, Aldous Wren. He starts creating what he calls bilingual architecture. So the inside of a house is totally normal, flat floors, right angles, a stable space for humans. But the outside is curved, built using the flowing, hyperbolic language of the substrate. These buildings don't just sit there. They're actively negotiating with reality, creating this small, stable pocket where both geometries can exist together. But the biggest revelation of all is yet to come. The settlers start to realize they weren't writing on a blank page at all. The ancient forest nearby, the Stave, had been there for thousands of years, actively formatting the land with its own living, branching, non-Euclidean geometry. The raw substrate wasn't raw at all. It was a text written in a language they had just mistaken for silence. You know, this whole story just leaves us with this one profound question. We think of ourselves as the map makers, right? We're the ones imposing order on a passive world. But what if the world has its own order, its own language? What happens when the very territory you're trying to chart is just as alive and just as intelligent as you are?